Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is still Victor Shi. It's December 22nd. And as you can see, I'm joined by my other co-host, I guess my co-host on the other podcast that I do, Jill Wine Banks. It is 10 a.m. Central Time for her. And for those in our audience, Jill is someone who sleeps very late. So I'm very grateful that she's with us today. Hi, Jill. Are you awake?
I'm not, but I have some coffee, so I will sip on it
Good.
during the show and try to wake up for you.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad. And I also know I was looking at Twitter just now, and President Biden was giving a briefing about the Midwest and the maybe not the polar vortex, but the
Yeah.
very cold weather that's coming in from Canada. And hopefully, our audience, if you're in the Midwest, you're staying warm. But how is it looking in Chicago right now?
Well, the snow hasn't started yet, and I need to go to the post office to mail off some books that people have bought as Christmas presents. And if I don't get them off, they're not going to get them. So I'm going to brave it. As soon as we're done with this, I'm heading out to do that.
Okay. Well,
But it is
this
expected to be really horrible. And I think I'm changing my plans for this afternoon so that I'm not going downtown.
Yes, that is good. Stay warm. I want to talk to you about Trump this week because this week's been particularly bad for Trump, starting with the January 6th criminal referrals to the Department of Justice on Monday, the vote by the House Ways and Means Committee to release 6 years of Trump's tax returns on Tuesday, and then today we're expected to see the January 6th committee release the full report, and then also the entire 6 years worth of Trump's taxes, and so. I'm wondering, let's start with maybe January 6th. On Monday, they made the criminal referrals on 4 counts, and yesterday they released the transcripts of 34 people.
Right.
Walk us through what you make of both of those developments this week.
So the transcripts that they have released are mostly almost 100% a different version of I plead the fifth.
Yeah.
I rely on my right of silence. I take the fifth. That's all. Roger Stone's just the fifth, or maybe that was Michael Flynn. So there's not a lot to be learned from that, except when you read the questions. Don't be put off by the fact that there's no answers. They aren't asking questions that they don't have facts to support. So they're telling us things that they know. And so when you read the report, you can see for yourself what they're thinking the crimes are. So that's in terms of what they've released. What was the other part of your question?
Oh,
Was
the criminal referrals. I know
oh
one of the biggest debates is whether those will actually make a difference beyond mere symbolism. But what do you think on the criminal referrals that we saw on
I
Monday?
I don't think so. I think that they will have a symbolic difference.
Mhm.
Um, the Department of Justice was already investigating all of the activities that are reported. So it's not like they didn't know about them. They will benefit enormously from the transcripts and from all the other evidence that's being turned over by the committee. That is a benefit. The referral, not so much. I mean, it's not like, oh my God, we discovered something you couldn't possibly have known about. That's not true. They knew about all of these crimes. So I don't think that there's much difference. And the Department of Justice will act on its own interpretation of the law and the facts.
Mm.
And nothing that Congress sends them is going to change how they evaluate that. And as they evaluate it against the standard of proof that they're held to, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, as opposed to the committee's purpose, which I think it has well served. It's hit it out of the ballpark, as my pin is saying.
Yes.
I think they did a great job in informing people who read the report, who aren't
Mhm.
following this, who aren't, the Department of Justice. So I think that they did a very good job in creating a historic or a record of the history of the facts
Yeah.
and informing the public of those facts. So I think it did a good job.
I want to briefly touch upon something that you said about the transcript so far, and you mentioned how many times people pled the fifth. And is that for maybe non-lawyer audience out there? Is that normal, or does that suggest to you they have something to hide?
Well, as a lawyer, I must say it can't be used against you. That's the whole point of the
Yeah.
Fifth Amendment, is that you can't be forced to testify against yourself. As a citizen, as a thinking human being, of course, if you don't have something to hide, you're going to answer the questions.
Right.
So you can instruct a jury that they cannot take it into account. In civil trials, you can. In civil trials, you can argue to the jury if they didn't answer a question, you can assume the answer would hurt them. That
Mm,
means you can assume if I ask you, did you do it? And you
yeah.
don't answer, I can't use that to convict you of a crime, but I can in a civil case.
Mm,
And I can say, if you refuse to answer that question, you can assume that the answer would have implicated him in a crime. So it's going to hurt in civil cases that people did this. And in fact, there's one example where uh, Tario, the leader of the Proud Boys,
yeah.
said, "Yes, I am the leader of the Proud Boys." Well, he's about to go on criminal trial or is on criminal trial now. And it's an admission from the defendant. So it can be used against him now. It can be used in this civil trial that he made this admission. Had he refused to testify and not admitted to that, he there'd be nothing to use against him in a criminal trial.
Interesting. So let's talk about the final report. And I want you to kind of think back to Watergate and the final report then, and kind of see what right now. What do you think is going to make the report successful this time around, and what are you going to be looking out for?
So, well, first of all, let me say, when you say Watergate report, in a sense, the prosecution, special prosecutor's report is an indictment.
Hmm,
We did, in fact, issue a very brilliant, very short summary of all the cases, not just the obstruction of justice case that I was involved in, but the campaign contribution cases, the dirty tricks, the plumbers, all of those sort of things were encapsulated in a very succinct little report that was crucial to me, by the way, in writing my book. It
hmm,
really had every detail of, on such and such a date, we subpoenaed X. The Supreme Court ruled on Y.
hmm,
It's very helpful. Um, in terms of the Senate committee's report, the Senate Watergate Committee, compared to this report, it was heavily focused on, I would say, legislative changes. So I'm hoping that will also be in
hmm,
the report from this Congress because I
yeah,
think that they've certainly highlighted a number of gaps in the law,
right.
things that a criminal could argue allow them some leeway. And so I think it would really be a good idea to tighten up those laws and make it clear that certain things are in fact illegal.
I mean,
Um,
who do
Go
you
ahead.
who do you think the audience should be for this? Because I mean, it seems clear that the hearings were for the public, and maybe DOJ even, but the reporting has it that it's going to be more than 800 pages long. It's going to be 8 chapters with 4 appendices. I mean, is the audience Congress and DOJ, and perhaps not the public?
I think when you say the public will read summaries, and I mean,
Right,
very
right.
few people will read 800 pages,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's understandable. And it shouldn't be necessary if there's good journalism involved
Mhm.
and good reporting. And Ari Melber is doing a introduction to one of the volumes of the report, sort of
Yes, yes.
summarizing the coup. Those are good ways to get the information, and following it on cable news channels that actually
Mhm.
use the facts
Yeah,
as opposed to there's also a 100-page Republican answer,
yeah.
which is anyway. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about channels like MSNBC that will present exactly the words of the report and talk about that in terms of what facts underlie those reports. And I think the committee did a good job on even saying what the four crimes were and saying, this is the evidence we have. Here's the facts. And then you can evaluate, did you hear that information from a witness? Did the
Mhm.
witness sound credible to you? That's how people can make a difference in who they vote for example. It could influence, but this will be largely, I think, for journalists and for history. So for books and for, 20, 30, 100 years from now, this will be the history of what happened.
Yeah, I think that public record is important. Do you think you mentioned, I mean, we talk about this a lot on iGen Politics, which is how do you get Republicans and Trump loyalists to see the facts? And for you and I, for anyone who has some sort of critical thinking skill,
Yeah.
to watch the January 6th hearing, you can't walk away with any conclusion other than that Trump is totally responsible for what happened on that day and that he incited this insurrection. But like you said, Republicans are trying to do this counter report. You have Republican supporters still spreading the big lie, Republican candidates spreading the big lie. I mean, how effective do you think this report will be for Trump supporters? And I know that we ask our guests all the time, what is the solution to that? But can you think of any way that we can reach those Republicans?
Well, of course, we ask that question of all our guests because
Yes.
we don't have an answer. And so far, unfortunately, the best answer I think we've gotten, and we've had a few, but I think Nick Kristof gave a very good one, which is you have to look for some common point of understanding. If
Mm,
you can get the other side to admit to one thing, then you have a common understanding and you can move from there. Well, if that's true, then
mhm,
isn't it also true that? And you can never, ever be attacking. You can never insult the person because that's not a way to get anyone to change their opinion. I personally think that the true loyal Trumpers are unreachable, that you cannot. Because, and I've had conversations where they have said, this is what I believe. The machines all flip votes. The Democrats all cheated. Well, you know about the 60
oh,
lawsuits. You know about the ninjas in Arizona. No, I don't believe any of that. That's not true. So if the realities that
mm,
are I don't believe that. How can you then you
right,
can't
right.
persuade them. So, but I believe that people, and particularly if he goes to trial, that a jury will base their opinion, their verdict on the evidence in the courtroom. That's what happened in the case against Manafort, where a Trump juror said, I love Trump, but I heard the evidence. I was sworn to do my duty as a juror, and I had to base it on the evidence in the courtroom, and he was guilty on all counts.
Mm,
So I still think that jurors, even those who reject facts in a courtroom, they feel differently.
mm. I see. Well, hopefully that is the case.
Yeah.
Let's, in the remaining time that we have left, talk about Trump's tax returns, what we know about that so far. And the IRS right now is under a lot of scrutiny because it failed to audit 2 years of his tax returns when he became president, which is unprecedented since Nixon, since 1973, because they've audited every president's tax returns since then. Talk to us about what we know so far from that and why you think this may have happened.
Okay, so first of all, it's been a policy since Nixon, not related exactly to Watergate, but related to the fact that he tried to get a huge tax deduction for his pre presidential papers. And that led to the IRS adopting a policy that they would every single year audit the president's taxes.
Right.
And the oversight committee said, we want to know how that's going. And so they subpoenaed his tax returns and information about the audit process. What they found is that the audit wasn't done until the day they made that request. That's when they
Mm.
started the audit. Now, obviously, the first thing that pops into your head is, well, of course they didn't do it. He was president. He
Yeah.
was the target. So
Right.
he told them not to. Um, they, the IRS, are saying, no, that's not. It's really because we are understaffed. We are outgunned. He had such a complex business structure, and we just simply didn't have the expertise in house to evaluate his taxes. That's why we didn't do it. Well, either reason, whether it's because
Yeah.
the boss said don't do it, or because you were totally incapable of doing it and didn't come forward to the American public and say, we need volunteers to work for the government who are experts in complex financial transactions, in complex corporate setups. Um, I, I- Although there is a law against the government taking volunteer services, just want you to know that. Um, they'd have to work out some way that these people were hired and paid. And of course, what's the committee's now going to recommend is one that it be a law that they audit, not a policy, and two, that they have enough requisite expertise to be able to actually do it and to do it timely. It doesn't help 3 years after to do it. If you want to know about conflicts of interest and where their income is coming from, to see whether foreign policy depends on the economic interests of the incumbent, you need to do that on a yearly basis. You can't do it after he's left the office. So I think some legislative changes are necessary.
Absolutely. So one final question for you. I think everyone is eager to see Trump be held accountable. What do you think is going to be the first case that Trump is held accountable for?
I think if I had to guess, and I hate guessing, but I would say the Fulton County, Georgia case that the DA, Fani Willis, I suspect she is going to be before the end of the year or very early next year.
Mm.
And I don't feel like the department is going to be ready until later in the year. And when I say later, I don't mean late. I just don't mean early January.
No.
And I think that Willis could act early January. So, and then as to whether they will hold off, the Department of Justice,
Yep.
will hold off until they have all of their cases lined up, or whether they would do, for example, Mar-a-Lago as case one, and then do obstruction of a proceeding, of an official proceeding second, and keep building evidence for false statements, for conspiracy, or whether they want to do them all at once, and insurrection as well.
Well, we will keep our eyes on that. We've talked a lot about Twitter on iGen, but it seems like Twitter is in a bit of a precarious situation.
Yeah.
Elon Musk is apparently thinking of finding a new CEO. But in case that collapses, where can our audience find you?
Well, I am loving Twitter, and I do engage on Twitter, and I hope that it survives. That they find, he says, when they find somebody crazy enough to take the job. Well, as long as he's involved, that would be a tricky thing. But
Yeah.
I am also on Mastodon at ohai.social, and I am on post.news, and my name is the same on all of them, at Jill Wine Banks. No hyphen in any of them, though. They don't recognize hyphens.
Well, there you go. That's easy enough. Thank you, Jill, for joining me. It's so great to see you. And for our audience, we will be back next week with a special episode of iGen Politics on Tuesday with Senator Leahy. So you don't want to miss that. But thank you for joining me on The Move today, Jill.
Thank you. My pleasure. Enjoy your day today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It is always so much fun talking with Jill, and hopefully you all learned something about many of the legal developments of this week. Let's quickly turn to some of the other news of this week. There isn't too much, but I quickly want to mention President Zelensky's speech. Yesterday, he first met with President Biden, and then he went to Congress to deliver this joint session of Congress speech with Madam Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Kamala Harris sitting behind him. And that's noteworthy because it's actually their last time sitting behind someone at the dais, and I guess together for the foreseeable future. So that's the last time that Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris will be appearing together behind that dais for any sort of congressional speech. And it's a little bit sad because, I remember the first time that we saw that moment and how important that was for so many women across the country to see two women break glass ceilings, not the highest glass ceiling, but break significant glass ceilings, and that inspiration that it gave, I think, to a lot of young women and a lot of young girls. And I think that's only going to be sustained for generations to come. So that was a bit of sad news, but was also a powerful image for me to see. And then also just the speech itself was really, really good. I highly encourage you guys, if you haven't listened to it yet, or if you haven't watched it yet, please go and watch it. It is, I think, essential viewing for everyone in America. In that speech, President Zelenskyy reiterated the fact that Ukraine is alive and kicking, that they're going to remain committed to this war, and that the U.S. is essential ally to helping them end this war. So that was a great moment. Also, not so great of a moment was during the speech, you saw two representatives in particular not clap, and those were Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz. They were sitting on their phones throughout the entirety of the session, and it was just really an embarrassment to see someone who came from a war-torn country, who has gone through so much, who's a proven leader, to be met with two people like that, just unworthy of their elected offices and so disrespectful. So never forget that moment. There's a new piece out and a new study that kind of looks at Gen Z and how we consume information. And I think it's really interesting. Some of the top lines from that piece I think are worth mentioning. First is that Gen Z now spends less time on TV than any other generation. Right now, we spend about less than an hour watching traditional TV news, which, like I said, is the lowest from any generation. And so instead, Gen Z is now flocking to social media, which isn't a surprise, but some of these numbers I think are telling. So, first of all, 9 in 10 Gen Zers spend more than an hour online every day on a given social media platform, and half of Gen Zers spend more than 3 hours a day on social media, which is twice as high as older generations. And among those social media platforms, the top three include YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And so I think those are some interesting ones. And I'm curious to hear what you all have to say about this. What social media platforms do you use a lot? And if you have any children, do you find that they use social media platforms more than you? And if so, if you have a ballpark of how much they use it, how much would you say you use them? I think that's an interesting question that I'm curious to hear your answers on. But that study just came out, I think it was yesterday, and it caught my attention. So wanted to mention that. And I think it's important for Gen Z because, when we talk about Gen Z in the workplace, Gen Z in politics, that's kind of this generation, whether it's good or bad. I think we can all have our opinions on that, but it's incumbent on people to meet us where we are, which is online spaces. The traditional cable news networks just don't really resonate with Gen Zers anymore. And we're spending a lot of time now on social media platforms and looking at just short, easily digestible pieces of information on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. So those are the types of streaming services I think a lot of Gen Zers are on. And other than that, I don't have too much else from the news of the day, else other than today we're, like we said on the podcast, or like we said on the show today, Trump's tax returns are going to be released in that January 6th final report. So keep an eye on that. Tomorrow we will be off, and next week we'll also be off for the holidays. So it's, I think now I'm just going to say, have a great holiday season. Hope you have a great Christmas. Hope you have a great Hanukkah. And we will see you after the new year. So I will see you in 2023. Hope you have a great, great holiday season. And thank you so much for watching this show. We will be back next year with some great episodes and great guests. So you don't want to miss it. You can find us I guess, right after the new year on this channel, youtube.com/Politicon. Be sure to like and subscribe and share this with anyone in your life who wants to learn about the news in a quick way and listen to some of the change agents and newsmakers and Gen Zers who are making it possible. Thanks again, and I will see you after the new year.